Disruptors and curious minds, welcome to Thinking on Paper. And today's show is about the United Kingdom, UK, my home, not Jeremy's home. But we're talking about the UK technology convergence and how the UK can remain relevant in a world, in a technological world that's moving at breakneck speed. And we're asking if that convergence of quantum, robotics, photonics, compute in space is the UK's differentiator. Could it lead the world in the convergence of technology? Let's find out. Today's guest is Rory Daniels, Head of Emerging Tech at techUK. Rory, thank you for Thinking on Paper with us today.
Thanks, both. Really great to be here.
Now, let's start with robotics. British robotics. Humanoids from Newcastle, Birmingham, Colchester. Will they drink tea? Will they be more polite than their US counterparts? Will they know how to queue, unlike the robots from France or Italy? And that's a joke question for a serious question. How is UK robotics different from US, Chinese, Japanese, or Brazilian robotics? What is special about the UK robotics industry?
That's a great question. I think the first thing to say is the UK's got a really strong legacy when it comes to the development of robotics. So we've been around for a long time, and we've got a lot of complementary strengths in everything from AI to chip design to connectivity technologies that make us really good at particular parts of the robotics kind of tech ecosystem. I would say the main difference probably between, I'd use the US and China as kind of, if I was to put them on one side, I'd say they are general purpose robotics. So when you see humanoids, they're typically coming out of US and China, and they do a wide range of tasks. But in a world that's built for humans, a lot of these companies think, well, we'll build a robot that looks like a human. In the UK, we're a lot better at more, you could say, niche or specialized tasks and robots that fit a particular mold for a particular type of task. So a robot that inspects wind turbines, for instance, or a robot that rolls onto a nuclear site to decommission or to move waste or that sort of thing. So we're really, really good at the more specialized instances of robotics.
So some of these legacy technologies that you mentioned, what's an example of one that the UK has been really good at and potentially translating that to multi-use robotics?
I'm going to kind of cheat a little and say there are a few technologies that in combination, actually, the UK has produced something really special in. So I'd use the example of autonomous vehicles. So one of the world's leading robotics companies in this space, it depends how you define robotics, but in terms of a machine that's autonomous is Wave, who are a member of techUK. You see them riding all around London and have been testing here for quite a while now. Born out of the UK, but really a global company. And it's the combination of advanced sensors and LLMs and a whole range of kind of connectivity technologies all coming together in one system and then applied to a particular business model. And then, you deploy and you scale. So the UK's got strengths in all these areas. Lots of them sit in universities, in other research institutions, government funded and otherwise. And now kind of you've got this new wave of innovators that are connecting them all together, joining the dots, applying new business models and scaling.
It's been a while since I was in London, actually. What are these autonomous cars? What would I see if I went to London tomorrow? What would I see, and how easy would it be for me to use one?
Yeah, so they're currently they haven't been deployed, so you can't, as a member of the public, ride in one just yet. But they've been driving around King's Cross for a number of years, and I believe are driving kind of more widely across the city now. Other companies are too. So Waymo is a good example, another techUK member company. But they've got safety drivers, and they're either, lots of these companies the drivers are still driving the car, two hands on a wheel, but mapping the environment as they go. Other companies are, drivers kind of hands off the wheel and being very cautious as to how the car moves and is ready to intervene at any moment. So different companies at different stages of technological maturity. But certainly if I look at Wave and Waymo, both committed to launching on UK roads in London by the end of this year, an autonomous ride-hailing service.
With a safety driver in or without? What's the actual law for the end of the year?
I believe without a safety driver, so you could get in a car and it would be just you, but you wouldn't sit in the driving seat. So I've been in a Waymo a few times in the US, in various cities, and that's, the car pulls up, you get in, you're the only person in it.
How did it feel?
At first, really weird, really strange. I don't drive myself, so to get in the car and it suddenly, you click your seatbelt in and you're off, and the car's talking to you and saying, "Hi, Rory, let's go on this journey together." You look at the screen and there's your route all mapped out, and that felt weird. It took some getting used to, but I recorded a video at the time, actually, my first experience, and kind of put it on my LinkedIn. And my comment there was, after a few minutes, I just thought, wow, it's you expect it to be slow and overly cautious, but it was actually assertive and confident in its driving, and it was one of the best, taxi rides I'd had in quite a while. And I remember, you could connect your phone to the speakers, blast your own music as you drive around San Francisco in the sun in a Jaguar. It was incredible.
We talk about trust a lot. That is trust in the machine.
We have the Waymos. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, in the States, and we have Waymos bouncing around all over the place, and seeing them is, I remember when I first saw it. I've never been in one, but seeing them is strange, and but it's cool. So I also have roots, I mentioned in the pre-production. My mom was born in Norwich, loosely Canaries fans, I guess you could say. But I want to talk about my view of my understanding of London cab drivers, right? Because, we talk a lot about tech and culture on this show. London cab drivers are part of the UK's culture, right? And this dynamic. How is that going to all work out? Are they trying to go autonomous? Can autonomous vehicles replicate the cultural value of UK cabbies? Like, let's talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's not a topic I'm massively familiar with, the black cab industry, as it were. I know the industry itself has gone through a number of changes over the years. So I know that most taxis, when I first moved to London, most taxis were petrol or diesel combustion engines. Now most are electric, still produced in Coventry, but by a non-British company using non-British battery technologies. And so it's already gone through a bit of a shift there on the hardware side. I would imagine that the service that the London cab provides is hard to replicate through technology, at least for quite a while. It's a personal service at the end of the day, and AI is becoming more conversational, sure. So you can kind of read into that what you will, but I'd also point out that the London transport market is absolutely massive, and so you would assume that there's enough space on the roads, as it were, for a number of different modes of transport all at once.
The UK historically is a technological powerhouse. Some of the greatest kind of founding seeds of the greatest technologies were all born in the UK. You could list the names in quantum, in AI, in robotics, in mass engineering since the beginning of civilization, really. They've all come from the UK. But of late, the seeds are still there, but they tend to scale elsewhere, in America primarily. So, thought experiment. I am a tech entrepreneur in my house. I'm creating some kind of new quantum VR, let's say, new technology. I'm getting interest from American companies. They're interested in my technology. They're interested in me. They're interested in my small team and taking us to America. How are you going to convince me to stay in the UK?
That's a good question. I think firstly, the UK's got loads of benefits that I think actually we take for granted. So the talent base and the infrastructure available for innovators, the fact that we are a relatively small market, but on the edge of a very large one in continental Europe, and relatively small geographically, but fairly joined up. We're actually a kind of a network of clusters that each one is not that far from the other. And compared to a lot of other countries, that's a real advantage. So first of all, look at the strengths of the UK. It's really strong in innovation, in R&D. It's one of the world's leading startup ecosystems, and on many or most kind of metrics for innovation and technology across Europe, it comes out top. So the UK is doing a lot really well. You're right, though, a lot of founders, companies will, at a certain size, maybe Series A, Series B, increasingly look to other markets to scale. And that tends to be the US. And to give a very simplistic view, I think it tends to be access to capital is a major driver, particularly for deep technologies or research intensive technologies like robotics or quantum or semiconductors, where you've got long development timelines, 10 to 15 years, and you need funders that are willing to kind of take that long-term risk. You find those in the US much more than you find them in Europe. So quite pervasive challenges behind what we'd call the valley of death, which not the nicest term, but yeah, that's the situation. And I just to caveat that, actually, there are still lots of examples and increasingly examples of British success stories. Unicorns, billion-dollar companies, particularly in fintech, but in increasingly more industries popping up left, right, and center. So it's not all doom and gloom, and there's a lot to celebrate.
I have some history in some of these ecosystems as well. I designed a high performance computing center for Georgia Tech with a few other folks, and I did a lot of stakeholder interviews with like really smart people, researchers, and that sort of thing. And I remember one computer scientist came to me and he's like, "What I really am looking for is a place where I could bump into really smart people and steal their ideas." Now, stealing their ideas is different, but the serendipitous, how do you engineer these? Can you engineer serendipitous connection between a quantum computer technologist and an AI engineer in your ecosystem? Is that something you're looking to do one-to-one, or is it a grander, bigger scale thing you're trying to pull off?
I think the first thing to say is, to a certain extent, you don't need to engineer it. I think it happens. I think it's no surprise that over half of the UK's deep tech companies are actually spin-outs from universities. And that doesn't happen, by coincidence. It's amazing talent. It's companies co-locating close to universities to pull on that talent. It's academic expertise that drives innovations in the deep tech that later becomes commercialized. And it's the IP that spins out the university. So a lot of it happens coincidentally. I'd say a lot of it is orchestrated, not just at the kind of, the level of a university, but the level of a region, for instance. So lots of, in the UK, we'd say local councils, they're responsible for regional governance or local governance, all have kind of place-based innovation strategies where they are consciously looking to essentially take the cluster of innovators and academics and investors that already exists and to amplify its strengths and to boost, the spillover effects between different professions and all that sort of stuff. So it's baked into innovation policy across the UK, and it's thanks to organizations like techUK that we're able to join up kind of disparate parts of the ecosystem to all move in the same direction. So it's a bit of it happens by chance, but a bit of it's conscious. And when we talk to government, we certainly want to see more of the conscious join up, the strategy behind all of this, and the investment to supercharge the innovation that's happening across the UK, but in pockets.
So real quick follow on to that. So you mentioned a high percentage of businesses coming out of university, spinning out of research and university. Do you have the same kind of in the States, we call them technology transfer offices, TTOs. Do you have that? Is that a similar structure in the UK?
Yes.
And is that enabling a lot of some of this stuff to happen?
It is. I think the challenge is that the size of the TTO or the kind of commercialization function of a university very much depends on the resource that the university is able to commit to that function. So there are, you've got your Oxfords and your Cambridges that have teams of over 100 people in a large TTO. In other universities, and this is kind of almost all of the university sector in the UK, you've got max 1, 2, 3 people. And so you've got a real disparity. And, I often think maybe technology can actually be part of the solution. I've seen kind of AI tools that allow researchers to spin out content in a more automated way that automatically generates a business case for your, IP and all the, gets the email ready to go to investors straight away just from an initial kind of description. So there's a real disparity, and the UK can't rely on its top 5, 10, 15 universities to produce most of the spin-outs. It won't work that way.
I think there's a ton, I have a theory. I think there's a ton of latent IP sitting on shelves that, man, if you just had some folks kind of dust it off and get it in front of some new eyes, interdisciplinary eyes, little micro groups of people, I think we could find some interesting things.
The UK has a north-south divide, and I was looking at some of the huge amounts of robotic investment and AI investment that is going into London at the moment on the robotics, like the top 10, Wave valued at 2.5 billion, Automator 152 million, Skyports, Humanoid, Grey Parrot. There's a lot of companies, and they all seem to be based in London. What's happening outside of London beyond, you mentioned a few universities with maybe 2 or 3 people in those. What's happening on a government level in terms of building infrastructure beyond London, and what is techUK doing beyond London?
Yeah, so there's a lot happening is the answer beyond London. You could look at, for example, particular government initiatives that kind of highlight this. So the main announcement, I would say, around robotics that came out of the government's modern industrial strategy that was published a number of months ago now was around the launch of a robotic adoption hub network. So a network of physical hubs across the UK that work with businesses in that region to basically hold their hand and as they look to adopt robots in whatever sector they're in. So that's a good example of how the innovations, but also the opportunities are UK-wide. There are a number of robotics clusters that we will find out soon where these hubs will be located, but you would imagine they will largely be located within existing clusters.
Where are those clusters? Can you, which are we talking? Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, Birmingham, Norwich?
I mean, most of the above. I would point to there's Coventry in the West Midlands is a really good example of strong heritage in automobile manufacturing. As I said, black cabs still manufactured there today, and so the industrial base that kind of a robotics industry sprung up from really, and so they are, I believe, the UK's first kind of dedicated robotics cluster. But there are many more in a kind of more informal sense. You could look at Edinburgh and you've got the National Robotarium there, which is the UK Centre for Robotics and AI, that are doing a similar thing, but you've got dozens of robotics companies that base themselves within the Robotarium and, again, benefit from that kind of agglomeration effect. So really disparate ecosystem in the UK.
Yeah, I think, like you said, place-based stuff is going to be really important. I think a lot of the trends that I'm seeing, you guys are probably seeing the same thing, that with what tech is doing or what AI is doing, there's going to be a push back to getting face-to-face with people and getting in the same room and craving that collaboration. So I think that's really interesting.
Well, that's one of the things that the UK has in its favor is its size, where it is small and everything is congregated in very small geographical places. So that is an advantage.
Definitely. Yeah.
Rory, tell me about, I read an announcement back in February about Barnsley. Barnsley was announced as the UK's first tech town. The tech secretary, I think, announced it back in February, and the idea was just to create this blueprint of a singular community working together to adopt technology across government, across different systems, and that sort of thing. I thought that was a pretty interesting endeavor. Yeah,
as you said, it's kind of seen as a little bit of a blueprint for a national strategy. I know that it's delivered in partnership with industry, and in fact, a few of our large members, so Adobe and Cisco and others, which is great to see. And I know that one of the focuses will be about how to embed things and technologies like AI into public services, and I guess get as close as possible to the citizen, the people that these technologies ultimately touch, and involve them in the kind of co-design and rollout process. So yeah, agreed. It's these place-based initiatives. It can't all happen at macro national level, it ultimately hits the ground somewhere, and why not go to that region and kind of co-develop and launch and trial and iterate alongside the end users.
Just trying to remember if I've ever been to Barnsley or not. I like the idea. So is this something, so you have cultural cities, like every year the cultural city in the UK changes? Is this going to be a similar thing where every year a different city takes on the mantle of tech city of the UK? And if they're not, that's a good idea. You should do that. You should
We'll let
organize that.
government know. Yeah.
Let government know. So let's stay on government from the very top down to local level. What are some of the cool initiatives of 2025, 2026 that you've seen in your job? Because you get to experience and witness a lot of what's going on. So could you name a couple?
Absolutely, yeah. So on a local level, I'd point to initiatives like RoboPass is a really interesting one. So it's set up in Milton Keynes, which I think has held the mantle informally, at least, as the most innovative council in the UK for a number of years. Has been the home of autonomous vehicles and drones, was a very early adopter of these technologies, and has been a bit of a test bed for how they can be safely developed and rolled out. And now I know the government has launched basically a little bit of kind of a passport scheme whereby these technologies can be tested in one locality and then hopefully rolled out to other localities in a way that is as kind of non-duplicative and hassle-free as possible, which in an ecosystem that is fairly joined up but also fairly fragmented, and you've got hundreds of councils and constituencies and what have you, makes a lot of sense. And then on a national level, I'd say probably the highest level I can think of is, I would point to the Robotics Advisory Group, which is a group that the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology established a few months ago to be basically a group of independent experts from across the UK's robotics ecosystem that advise the department, DSIT, on robotics strategy. And a number of ministers attend meetings and kind of hear directly from the experts what they should be doing in robotics and why. And we, techUK and myself, were appointed to that committee just a few months ago, and kind of bring our members' views and priorities and asks directly to the top of government. So from the bottom to the top, there's lots of really interesting stuff happening. And our job really is to plug our member companies into it as it happens.
I'm going to say a word, Jeremy. Brace yourself. Okay, brace yourself. Metaverse. So, robotics, virtual twins. Have you met any industrial virtual worlds combined with robotic initiatives happening in anywhere in the UK?
Yes, absolutely. There's lots happening in this space. So we would call them digital twins, and I point to companies like Siemens, that a member of ours, that have been deploying digital twins of factories, for instance, for some time now. And these models essentially kind of that operate in real time, that gather data from sensors in industrial environments, feed them directly into the model, and enable operators in the factory, for instance, to see the state of a machine or the position of a package or whatever it is in real time. They've been doing this for a number of years, but the data has become a lot more sophisticated over the last few. I'd also point to members of ours like NVIDIA, that when it comes to things like the training of robots, often nowadays this happens in simulation, it happens virtually. So Wave and Waymo, these autonomous vehicles, are really good examples whereby they may have driven millions of miles on roads across the UK, the US, and other markets, but they've driven billions of miles in simulation. And so they've encountered however many millions or billions of edge cases of unique environments that maybe one day theoretically they could face in real life, but they've in theory already been there, done that in simulation. So digital twins are enabling everything from real time, logistics and inventory monitoring, all that sort of stuff, to robotic training and deployment.
And soon the moon.
Yeah, way cooler than the metaverse. Digital twins are way cooler than the M word.
The M word.
It's interesting. There's a lot of things that can happen in digital twin in the industrial side of the fence that have been, we talked about this earlier, like things happen in the industrial environments earlier on and they're not as exciting until they are. Mean time between failures in large facilities can be mapped and potentially predicted. I think there's a lot of A lot of cool things happening in the digital twin realm. Do we want to stay on robots? Do we want to go to space tech, Mark? What are you feeling?
Quantum, I'm interested in, because so we've spoken to Inflection, we've spoken to IonQ, we've spoken to Horizon, a lot of UK-based quantum computing companies, and Oxford is the epicenter, if not of maybe even of the world of quantum computers, at least at that early seed phase that we spoke about. There's a lot going on in the UK in terms of quantum. You mentioned photonics. Could you speak us through what is photonic quantum computing first, and what's happening in Oxford?
Big questions. So photonics, in a sentence, is the science and technology of light. So it is it is essentially the equivalent to electronics. So manipulating the photon, not the electron, and doing existing things, compute, sensing, communications, not at the speed of the electron, but at the speed of light. So real enabling technology, and then we can talk about this. But techUK really acted in this space the last year or so, because what a massive opportunity for the UK to lead. We're already quite far ahead of almost every other country. But
well, that's why quantum is so interesting, because AI, the UK hasn't lost the AI race. It's probably not even in the AI race. But if it's leading the quantum race, this is a real opportunity for the government and people like yourselves to really accelerate and put the foot down and make and remain the leader.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd say it's leading components of the AI race, but it's leading a huge chunk of the photonics and the quantum races. And the real opportunity for the UK as a whole and for UK businesses is the combination of the two technologies. It's what happens when you have a quantum computer that can, yes, manipulate atoms at the quantum level to do things traditional computers can't even imagine doing, or would take them a very, very, very long time. But also the data that moves around the system moves at the speed of light. And that's the difference between a great and an incredible quantum computer. So the good news is we already have companies in the UK that are world-leading photonic quantum computing companies. I point to Orca Computing as a really good example within our membership. Been doing it in things in King's Cross for a number of years now. And I'm actually, as far as I know, the first company to have sold, in a commercial sense, a working photonic quantum computer to a real kind of paying customer that didn't use kind of grant money or that sort of thing. So a real world first, and that's coming straight out of UK labs. And the opportunity, we would say, is let's harness that potential, let's scale it, and let's export it as quickly as possible.
Half the battle kind of is coming up with the technology, the research that translates into potential commercialization. Then you also have the talent development side of the fence and those pipelines and that sort of thing. One thing in quantum that's really interesting to me that we've been following for a while is this idea of, and Mark, this is a new term I'm throwing out there. I'll get your take on it. The idea of a problem parser, meaning when there's a research initiative.
Is this your terminology?
It's my term. I'm starting it out. I'm dropping it, see if it lands. The idea of someone who can intelligently break down a problem into what fits for quantum, what fits for classical, and how to stitch it all back together in a really meaningful workflow. Are you seeing folks starting to emerge and saying, hey, I can do that? Or maybe the position wasn't traditionally there, but the demand is going to be, I think.
Yeah, I think we're seeing early examples of it. We're seeing, certainly I know, that university level is a good example, whereby I think 10 years ago, you would have been hard pressed to find a degree that in robotics, for instance, that wasn't essentially mechatronics, the physical hardware engineering degree. Nowadays, I look at a lot of universities in our membership and beyond who are launching robotics plus AI courses, for instance, where they recognize that software is as much a component of the system as hardware, and it's the interaction between the two that's the real kind of special sauce, the difference between a working and a world-leading product. So there's just one specific example within education where, those interdisciplinary skills are absolutely critical if you are to build, the next robotics company that leads in the UK or globally will not be the robotics companies of the past however many decades. They will be a robotics company with AI built in at the core from the start, probably 3, 4, 5, 6 other emerging technologies as core kind of components of their value proposition. And the skill set required to even begin to comprehend what that system looks like goes well beyond individual disciplines. So yes, that's the way education is moving, but I'd argue industry probably is well ahead of the game of,
Yeah,
well
Jeremy,
ahead of
sorry,
the
but
education.
the PP, the problem, the problem parser is an AI. There's no human in the loop for parsing that problem.
I disagree.
You disagree? How,
100%.
go on then. 100%. How do you
100%.
disagree? Why do you disagree?
The technical aspects of how quantum and classical can work together, that could be automated and simplified with AI. But just looking at a problem from a human level, saying, hey, here's the problem, here are the pieces that are best served in this angle and that angle, and then putting it back together. It's like data getting crunched. Data is nothing to humans until it becomes information, and dare we say wisdom at some point, right? So I think humans will still be in that piece of the puzzle. I could be wrong.
Rory,
those listening 10 years from now.
Rory, is he underestimating the capacity of LLMs to? Is he underestimating the AI capabilities?
I mean, completely off the top of my head, I feel like maybe this is a question of data availability, right? So if you've got an LLM trained on, I don't know, the repository is the world's internet, all information on the internet, then you're probably going to get a fairly standard, pretty unimaginative combination of technologies. And yeah, it can create a working kind of system, but it's nothing special, nothing that the best engineers couldn't, if they spent long enough, they could dream up something a lot better. I think the mention of wisdom is really interesting. And yeah, at what point does AI even begin to replicate that? I don't think we're anywhere near that. I think there are companies trying to move in that space. You've got the growing field of neuromorphic computing, for instance. So the structure of chips inspired by the human brain itself. But it's still in its fairly kind of early days. And I think until you have new data inputs that go beyond the world's repository of information online, and you combine that with some different way of conceptualizing the problem. So yeah, it could be quantum, could be neuromorphic. Then I don't think you're going to beat the world's best engineering minds.
Mark, think about this. You have a quantum system talking to an AI to figure out what is best to feed through the quantum system. You have a classical system talking to an AI that's trying to figure out what's best for the classical system. The answer by the AI is going to be sycophantic, and it's going to be like, quantum is amazing. Everything should go through quantum.
No, well, now I
classical
disagree. No, okay, but that's I think that's quite a narrow-minded view of what AI is capable of. But okay, wisdom is not universally distributed. I think we all agree that wisdom isn't universally distributed. So Rory just said, okay, it will never compete with the world's greatest minds. Let's say that's true. How many of those are there? And at what point does the AI become good enough, wise enough, however we're defining wisdom, does it become wise enough that, in fact, it's better, it's wiser than 99% of the world? And there's not enough of the 1% to do all of these tasks, so we employ AI to replace the human in the loop.
Well, let's define wisdom first. Let's define wisdom and then pack back to that, Mark. So, Rory, how would you define wisdom?
I would say wisdom is the ability to adopt a novel perspective on a problem in a way that moves beyond conventional conception or understanding or reasoning. Is that little something that is probably very hard to build through technology, because technology ultimately, at least for now, thinks in bits, and that's quite a linear process.
So would that be like a net new insight? Is producing like a net new insight?
Potentially, yeah.
Or Socrates, I know that I know nothing, in which case an AI will never be wise, because there's no way that it's admitting to that.
Well, let me throw this out there. I'd love to get your take on this, both of you guys. So I think about like knowledge is acquiring, there's data, you ingest the data and you turn that into something that makes sense in your brain. I think wisdom to me is applying that knowledge to experience and further applying that next. And I think experience right now is like it's a conscious thing. So now we're in this conscious discussion or sentience discussion. Do you have to have consciousness to obtain wisdom?
But I guess also define experience, right? So the example of the Wave and the Waymo car that's had 1 million miles on the road and 1 billion in simulation, has it not experienced the world in actually more ways than we can experience it, in the physical and the virtual to that degree?
Mark, you'll have to rein me in here.
Answer the question, Jeremy. Answer the question.
Well,
Answer the question.
So experience, right? So experience, right?
So you're saying yes to the Waymo has experienced the world.
I just no, because I think experience. So it's like experiencing the color red, or experiencing the smell of a rose. Can a sensor ingest something that is rose-like? Yes. Can whatever processes that sensory input know the experience of when you were, in 5th grade and you gave a rose to your girlfriend or something, and that memory and that piece of it? It's really tricky and like kind of a funky thing to think about. I think just processing sensory input is different than processing it based on, experience is tough to define, Rory. You're right.
When Roy speaks about that example of the Waymo, and it is experiencing something.
Is it qualia though, Mark?
No, it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters.
I think it's sensing. I don't think it's experiencing. I think there's a layer deeper, and it could be consciousness. It could be, is it uniquely human, or not human, but biological to experience? It ingests, it senses, it detects, but it doesn't understand it doesn't convert that into meaning, and therefore I think it's not wise.
That's a great differentiator right there. What you said: sensing, detecting, processing. Yeah, that's cool.
And in my car, that's what I want. I don't want the human squidgy, mushy problems in my drive. I don't want them to suddenly remember giving a rose to their girlfriend 35 years ago and then just crashing into a lamppost because they've gone all nostalgic. I want that lack of emotion. I just want the sensors.
Let's try to kind of land the plane, so to speak, on some of the things that you're excited about kind of moving forward, some of your initiatives. There's a Frontier Compute initiative that I saw that was recently announced. You're bringing some people together, some workshops, doing some research, a future report. Talk to us about that a little bit.
I think the crux of what we talked about is that there are a number of emerging technologies that are advancing rapidly and that are converging in their application to create entirely new possibilities for businesses and for countries and for innovators. So we as techUK have basically spoken to a lot of tech companies and concluded that there's a real opportunity for the UK in the convergence of several of these. So quantum, photonics, neuromorphic, and we've thrown biological compute into the mix as well. So how do those 4 technologies enable vastly new forms of compute that support applications and new intelligences really far beyond our existing kind of the frontier of AI as it stands?
So the goal is to get some really amazing UK-based people in a room, talk through some of this stuff, explore the space between the tech, map it, figure it. It sounds super fun. Sounds like a room I'd like to hang out in.
Absolutely.
Because I know, like in America, so Trump famously, America's going to rule the world in AI. He's come out publicly. He says that. However much you want to believe or take that, it's up to you.
I'm not associated with my country's leadership. Just a disclaimer there.
In the UK, like what we've been speaking about, how do you convince the policymakers that we need the money, that the UK needs more money in the tech infrastructure to keep these technologies in the UK, to keep these people in the UK? How do you convince them to unleash the gates, the financial gates, or and if that's not going to happen, get the private investment to turn up a bit?
So I think there are a few things, and we are very good at them at techUK. The first is bring together the right people to identify the opportunities very clearly, to base that on a clear understanding of the latest technology. So get the technologists in the room because they know what's going on, and to put that to the decision makers, the people with the money as well, in language that they understand. So we do that through our reports and our events, and we respond to government consultations and all that sort of stuff. So that's our kind of bread and butter. I'd say another important point is speak to the people, the decision makers that already to some extent get it, or are the ones that you could, feasibly make understand. So, for instance, we work a lot with chief scientific advisors and the national technology advisor, people in government with decades of experience in industry, right at the top of some of the world's leading tech companies, and then they move into government, and we talk directly to them, and they get industry, they get the challenges and the opportunities, and they have a direct line often actually to number 10 and the Prime Minister. So we go right to the top. And I think the Robotics Advisory Group that we sit on is a really good example of that. So being in the room with the ministers, with the decision makers. And I think third thing I'd say is really bringing all the right kind of constituent stakeholders on board to make things happen. So this can't be driven entirely by industry. We don't want this to be entirely driven by government. Academia, investors, ethicists all need to be part of this conversation. And so techUK uses its convening power to put the right people around the table to make things happen.
I love it. Yeah, that's something we think about a lot. Moving into the next year, Mark and I are, and we haven't officially kind of put this out there yet, but we've been loosely connecting the dots between humanity and tech for a while, but we really are thinking about formalizing some of this stuff and mapping some of these technologies to the human structures, power, governance, collaboration, communication, belonging, like all of these really interesting human elements that don't often get mapped to that kind of stuff. How important is the social aspect, the human element to the process, and how do you dance with both?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is absolutely vital. I think if you look at the design of these technologies, technology is a tool, right? It's agnostic in its nature, but not its application. So the first thing is we as techUK, many of our member companies, recognize that you need to work really closely with the community with the technology impacts, and you need to bake kind of safe, ethical, responsible design into these technologies. Really, really important, and maybe increasingly so. But the other thing I'd say is actually on the other end of the spectrum when it comes to adoption. So we are doing increasingly a lot of work around public perceptions of emerging technologies, because building the world's leading robotic X or Y is fantastic, and it happens in the UK, great. And if the company stays instead of moves abroad, great. And we solve all these problems, great. We produce the next world leading company in X or Y. If the public don't adopt it, then we're back to square one. And now more than ever, we need to tell a compelling and a positive, but crucially, I think a realistic story about how technologies applied in the right way can lead to tangible results for people's lives. It can drive growth and productivity in the economy, but it can help you care for your elderly relative, or it can lower your energy bills, or whatever it is, whatever people care about. Technology is a key part of the puzzle, and we're not very good at talking about that in a way that makes sense to normal people.
I love it. Yep. It's a big, big mission, Rory. I love that you're embarking on it. I love that you're leading it. Would love to stay in touch and even participate potentially in some of the things you're doing. It really lights us up and is part of the work that we're already doing. So thanks for joining us today, man. This has been great.
Rory, just before you go, could I ask you just in like 20 seconds to say what is techUK? Because I think that we probably need to actually define that at some point. So Rory, what is techUK?
Good question. So techUK is the UK's technology trade body or trade association. So we're basically a collection of just over 1,100 tech companies, and we bring the sector together. We showcase examples of best practice, and we push government for policy, strategy, regulation that is shaped by industry.
With the mission to
make the world the best place to develop and deploy technologies.
Thank you. And could I ask one last favor? Would you mind, and you don't have to do this, but we all ask all our guests to do this because one day we might actually have an marketing budget. Could you say, I am Rory, the emerging tech lead for techUK, and I think on paper with Mark and Jeremy?
Absolutely. So
Please.
I'm Rory. I'm techUK's head of emerging technology and innovation, and I think on paper with Mark and Jeremy.
Awesome. Thank you. You're on mute, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'm going to hit stop here, guys. Rory, thanks for joining. Do me a favor, make sure your local uploads so we can get the best quality of the video. Let me stop it here.